Everything's expensive. And why is that? Why? Well, if you look at the collector boxes for Magic the Gathering, or regular booster boxes for Pokemon, or even the play boxes for Magic the Gathering, the commander decks, whatever, there's a lot of things going into it. At the base level, it could be a price hike on the Wizard side, and possibly the distributors hiking a little bit to make up for lost times from 2022, 2023. And then you got like a solid little floor there. But then some carpeting on the floor, some nice thick shag carpeting on the floor, is the tariffs. And depending on where you are in the world, maybe the tariffs aren't affecting you that much. But in North America, they're a huge deal. In Canada, I mean, we've had the 25% retaliatory tariffs for April, May, June. So at least 3 months, 4 months, right? And so some of the product came in during that time, at least came to the store during that time without additional tariffs on that. And those were the collector boxes. But then I think that they also now have tariffs on them. So my suspicion that they were coming direct from Belgium rather than routed through the States isn't necessarily the case, because they've got tariffs on them too. Or maybe the tariffs on them are to make up the tariffs on the other things, like, things that they may have reduced the tariff threshold on at the distribution level, like they may have absorbed some of the tariff cost early on, and now they're trying to make up for it, maybe. But they do seem to be about 25% more expensive in Canada. I don't know about the States, but I mean, obviously, when the tariffs were introduced and whether or not they were, delayed or whatever, now a lot of them are in full effect. And so when things land, and they land at a port in the U.S., that's when they get tariffs. And if they happen to land in a port in the U.S. and then transit to Canada, then they also get more tariffs. So that explains the Canadian high prices, the shag carpeting on that, and then also U.S. high prices as well. And then I guess there's probably, even before that, there's like a floor seal or something like that on the licensing for Final Fantasy and Spider-Man. Not so much in Edge of Eternities, hence the reason why their floor is a little bit lower. But I think it's at least an extra $100 for Edge of Eternity's collector booster boxes than Tarkir collector booster boxes. So that gives you an idea, because that's basically over a third of the price. I think it's a third higher now. So it's pretty crazy. So you end up with, basically, once it gets to the store, you're at this floor, right? You got all this flooring, and someone comes into the store, and now you have to mark it up to a certain amount. And so people that did pre-orders for Tarkir or Final Fantasy, because, I guess it was technically Final Fantasy, Edge of Eternities, and Spider-Man were all available for pre-order sometime around February, March. Tarkir came later for some reason, like about a couple of weeks, at least in Canada. So the stores took pre-orders prior to any tariff stuff, without knowing the exact numbers, right, of tariffs, and maybe thinking there were not going to be tariffs. There definitely weren't going to be tariffs, but there were. And then, the prices had already the licensing in them, the licensing costs, or whatever Wizards was charging the distributor, and the distributor was charging the store, but then you throw tariffs on top of that. Anyway, so a lot of these stores had to, or chose to, absorb this increased cost for the product that came with tariffs on them when they sold pre-orders prior to there being tariffs, which was a mistake on most stores' part. But a lot of stores require these pre-orders to actually pay for the orders, so they kind of were stuck between a rock and a hard place, because they got to find capital somewhere else if they don't take the pre-orders. And maybe in an ever-changing, unknown world, you might want to scale back on that so that you don't get bit in the ass again. But So it's possible also these stores are trying to recover some of those losses, which could be, adding to, you got a rug on the floor or something like that, right? I don't know why someone's putting a rug on shag carpet, but someone probably has. So now someone walks into the store, and we've gone from, I don't know, I think most boosters at this point are a third more expensive, maybe as low as 20% more expensive, but a third more expensive, possibly 40% more expensive, depending on which store you're in. So you go into a store and you find something that you want, and suddenly it's not double the cost. It's not even 1.5 the cost. So I guess it's not that bad. But since the price has been rising on this stuff since 2020, and there were some earlier price rises in like 2016, 2017, 2018, but they were very small amounts, like 5% increases. But we've now gotten to the point where in Canada, a booster box at retail level is now well over $200, approaching $300, just for the same margins that you'd have when I first opened the store. It was probably closer to 160 something, maybe 170. And then prior to that, I mean, it was probably in the 130s, because like some of the booster boxes you could get distribution when I opened the store were priced at a level that you could sell them in the 130s and 140s and still make an okay margin on them. And then even the ones when I opened the store, you could price them well. That was probably close to the minimum cost of the distribution for anything new that was coming out that wasn't like a Commander Masters premium product or Universes Beyond. But now the floor has moved up for everybody, and especially at the retail level. And now everything's really expensive. So it's the boxes that are above 200 Canadian dollars. Therefore, they're approaching, I think, 200 US dollars. I don't look at all the prices in US dollars all the time on a TCG player. I get my news from people who talk about whatever the TCG player prices are, and they seem to be around the Karlov Manor was at a low point at say like 120 US, but most of the booster boxes have been above 130 US since that point, and Bloomborough cracked the 140, and Tarkir is closer to the 150. So that changed a lot of things since, you look back at 2015, 2016, 2017, people talking about booster box prices and generally under $100 US, and now they're approaching $200 US. And I'm assuming the Final Fantasy ones are $200 US because they are more expensive at the distribution level than a Tarkir is, right? So I would assume, and I think that's what I've been hearing, is that they're 205 shipped to your door at least, or if not a little bit more than that. So since 2017, if you were to compare just the standard release product at under $100, $90, maybe even actually back in 2015, maybe like $80 US, and now a granted premium licensed product of Final Fantasy, $200 and something dollars, and that's not price gouging. That's they're paying for it at the distribution level, the retail stores, so they got a floor on that, and they got to make their very small margin that they've always made. Imagine if they were doing a 40% markup, which, as far as I know, no one really does in game stores, even though it's standard for almost any other kind of retail environment other than groceries, which, if you take everything a grocery store sells, the average markup is 2%, right? The average margin or the average profit margin is 2%. But most other retailers, it's standard practice for there to be 40% profit margin. And that's not the case with game stores. They're not taking 40%. I'd say it's an average of 10 to 20%, closer to the 20%. So above 15% is probably the standard. Except on like release day, then you can get closer to the 10% because people need to churn through the stuff that they ordered. So unless, of course, something's really hot, like Final Fantasy, and then they don't have to put down the 10%. They can put it up to 30%. Oh, they can get close to that 40%. But people are now very, very wary of all these prices. Not everybody, because the Final Fantasy crowd gladly played all those prices. So that makes me wonder, what else do they buy usually, right? They just, it's like they didn't even think about the price. They just bought, right? And they wanted Final Fantasy stuff. Is the Spider-Man crowd like that? I'm not so sure. I mean, there's certain Spider-Man, fans that are, comic collectors, and they're used to paying, $5,000 for a graded key. So maybe they do have the kind of spending habits of a Final Fantasy player, but I'm guessing they're closer to a Magic the Gathering player. So I'm not sure if Spider-Man will move as quickly as Final Fantasy did. I could be wrong. I'm still on the wagon that Avatar is going to be bigger than Final Fantasy. But all of us could be wrong, and it could be Spider-Man, right? Because people haven't been talking in a very excited way about Spider-Man. They haven't been that negative on it. I mean, maybe it started off a little bit negative, but for the most part, we're in neutral to positive territory for Spider-Man. So the movement of that might be pretty good. I don't know. We'll see. But these prices are interesting because you would have thought we couldn't get to this level in prices and that the market would crash if we got to these kinds of prices, but that's not the case. And I guess, I don't know if anyone is speculating about this, but I think that Wizards in a little bit of price discovery because they found out that $1,000 for 4 booster packs doesn't work. But they're trying to find out, well, how far can we push it? And I think the Final Fantasy collector booster boxes is the upper limit so far, but I don't know if that's the end of it. Is there something bigger than Final Fantasy, even bigger than Avatar, coming next year? That's the price at distribution level is going to be even much higher. Because like when the Final Fantasy booster boxes, when they were first available for pre-order up till that last crazy bit in, say, the last week or two, those prices weren't much more than, I don't think they were more than a 40% margin on those. In fact, I think it was probably under 30% still. Until we got to the $1,000 US, then you were around 40% or above, probably. So that could be another part of this, is the usual Wizards of the Coast price hikes, but also a little price discovery. Each set has something that they're trying to push the envelope on, and if you do it to enough different things and create enough confusion, no one can really tell that these prices are moving up. Because some prices aren't moving up, and then others are moving up just a little tiny bit, and then there's others that are just a lot higher, and then maybe it's the license, maybe it's the cost, whatever. Who knows? They're in a market right now where you can hide a lot of things. You can hide your price hikes under the guise of tariffs. So they could very well be doing it, and we may be looking at forevermore, I don't know, 175 US booster boxes for standard release products in Magic the Gathering, and over $200 for a licensed Universe Beyond type thing, or a premium thing could be at like $300 at this point. I don't really remember what Modern Horizons 3 was like in US dollars. It was certainly, I think it actually might have been definitely over $300 for even just a play booster box of Modern Horizons 3, is from what I remember in US dollars. But correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below. So we're, since the beginning of 2024, sorry, the beginning of 2025, we've been marching towards increased prices, but 2024 was an almost gradual increase because we were coming off of 2023 when things were not moving quite well, so Wizards didn't want to rock the market. But now that we're in a really hot market, that doesn't seem to be the case. And Pokemon is no different at this point. I think that, you know, especially with distributors, they do jack up the price of Pokemon after release. When they get another wave of product, that product is sold at market conditions, and the stores that take that then have to increase their prices. So that's a standard thing for Pokemon. It just, for the most of Scarlet and Violet, it never really became a thing because the distributors couldn't even move the first wave. So the any other continual waves didn't really have that. It was a shock to anyone who opened a store during that time period and was expecting, oh, Pokemon boxes are always the same price and you can just get them whenever you want to get them. I didn't think that, only because I've been watching so much stuff on YouTube about this kind of stuff, that it didn't really shock me when this happened. In fact, I was expecting certain things like that to happen. Not the specifics of how it was going to play out, but I did expect it. Anyway, this video is just about why are prices the way they are, where are prices going, and does anyone have the answers to this? Because I can't necessarily predict it. I don't think anyone can predict things, but at this point, I have no idea what to think and where things are going. So anyone else's ideas, I'd welcome. So comment below, let me know. Have a good day.